top 100 movies list. I'm gonna list them out. And I'm gonna give short, but not quite to the point, through the point explanations for all of them. I'm listening to Clarence Clarity's No Now. Okay, so we're starting with A Taxi Driver. It's a leftist movie, and it's not too corny, so I like it. Inherent Vice. Stoner movie. It's a period drama, it's not fucking boring, too, unlike every period drama. Oldboy. You know, this isn't too high up there for me, but the violence is great, and there's incest. Zelig. This is a Woody Allen movie to end all criticisms of Woody Allen as this, like, ooh, or this, like, narcissistic guy, because it's both. It proves both, and it disproves both. He's none of those. He's a chameleon. Do the chameleon. So, generally, better than his intellectual bullshit ripping off Fellini. And, much smarter, too. It's the meta Woody Allen movie. Sorry to bother you. It's a good movie to, instill moral ambiguity into the character, like another on my list, Wolf of Wall Street. But it doesn't make that this sort of, oh, will they, won't they? It's just, like, fucking crazy, And Wolf of Wall Street is especially there because whether or not, you like it, it's better than anything cocaine. It's up there with, not quite the Japanese stuff with sniffing, mile-long rails of cocaine, but it's pretty good. Beijing Bicycle. This is moral ambiguity, neorealism at its finest, though I'm reading. I'm fine. I'm in the sun. Probably 10 minutes. Probably 10 minutes. Sorry. I'll be fine. Love you too. Trainspotting. It's a Scottish movie. Very smelly. Line spotting. It's sort of like this lesson to teach people in which facet it's not very interesting, but the characters are very interesting. And the expression that it uses, I don't find the actual sort of praxis corny, just the message itself, fizzes out a bit at the end. I don't disagree with it. Ichi the Killer. Sadomasochism in film. It's great. Scott Pilgrim. Edgar Wright is good, and you have the editing, and mainly this sort of character that you don't have to like or hate, which is good. Abstracted somewhat. He's not even, like, a wimp or anything. Shaun of the Dead. Another Edgar Wright. And here, of course, you have, the slacker, but he's not quite a slacker either. It's more kind of filled out, frankly, which is, British film isn't as dismissive. The Thing. Antarctic movie. I place very real emphasis on setting, especially Antarctica. And Antarctica is gold. Spirited Away. I watched this first when I was like 3, and it's really good. You have the scene with the stairs, and it's a lot of stairs. It's just abstracted into this like weird sort of terrain and you know, geophysical formatting. I guess there's a valley like that, but then you have a train that goes over the sea. It's all cool stuff. Happiness of the Katakuris. Only Japanese musicals are this good. Only Japanese musicals. Another one is Tokyo Tribe, which is a gangster movie, you know, sort of like West Side Story, I'd imagine. But anything I could imagine West Side Story being is shit. Crank, it's an action movie which justifies the action and justifies more action every sort of second and more smarter action every second with its premise. Crank 2 just has a dumber premise, but it's still cool. The Swimmer, this is the sort of Crank of the 60s with Burt Reynolds or whoever the fuck, Lancaster, I think. And you just have this character with like a mental breakdown, and it's this sort of psychological depiction that's actually interesting because it doesn't like put all the cards on the table and try to explain like, oh, he's like this because of this and this and this, you know? And you have Slow West. It's a Western movie. It's a bit acidic, but post-acidic, really, in the fact that it actually kind of like that Coen Brothers movie looks at the reality of the situation with the immigrants and stuff. It's funny how they have like the Swedish immigrants who are orphaned instantaneously. Mad Max 2. I don't have Fury Road on here because I don't feel like it, or like I don't really quite remember much. But Mad Max 2, you know, he like kind of swings, and then it's sort of like Rocky and Rocky 2 in the same movie. Rocky, the whole series is great. I don't fucking care what anybody says. It's great. Maybe Rocky 3 isn't as good as the rest, but Rocky 5, that's gold. Take the Money and Run. Another Woody Allen movie, great, you know, the sort of posing of this character, which works in film because it's like, you don't actually have to like the character, it's just the plot has to be entertaining. You know, the character doesn't have to succeed to make a story. If you try to like connect the sort of moral message or sort of logistics of story building, it's nonsense because story building is just words. Suspiria. I fell asleep to this movie first time I saw it, which I consider good because it was very pleasant, but very good colors in this movie. It's one of those aesthetic movies like a Beyond the Black Rainbow. Very good aesthetics. I fell asleep to that too. Only God Forgives. That's a good movie. He gets his hands cut off. That's the best part of it. Where the Buffalo Roam. It's one of the Hunter S. Thompson movies, and Bill Murray does really a pretty good job as a part. You know, he's a bit more orthodox in it, which I don't know if it gets it rightly, but it's still a good movie. You know, it's not corny like 80s movies like that one Tom Hanks Suburbs movie. Then Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. You know, whereas Where the Buffalo Roam definitely has more of a plot to it, Fear and Loathing is more of this sort of Ouroboros of experience. The Look of Silence, it's another leftist film, so I agree with it. And also, it's not very, like, heavy-handed, except it is very heavy-handed. And it gives you this look of, like, the politics of Indonesia and how these right-wingers still in charge. It's just like they were Nazis, and they're still, like, people left from them who are just like, you know, yeah, I did that. Sort of desensitization. And looking up that, actually, the other movie, the movie before that, I forget what name it is, but it's about the genocide itself. This movie is about this guy going around and talking to people involved in the genocide. There were 2 different producers to it, and to complete this list of 150 movies, I scribbled in my mind, and I also looked at all the independent production companies. That means, like, you know, I looked up A24, and then I was like, independent production companies, and there's like, I don't know, like 30 of them, at least on like the Wikipedia, sort of external, not external links, but, you know, see also. 12 Monkeys. Good time travel, sort of good synchronization of plot mechanics and dramatics to it. Amores Perros. This is a hyperlink movie, and it's
Hey Harry.
yeah.
I'm gonna lock the door in front. So I'll leave this open for you. And just lock it when you come in, okay?
Okay. I'm in the sun.
I know, but it's still cold. You trying to get sun?
Yeah.
When are you coming in, like in 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Don't stay out too long, Gary. And you're loud. Sorry. I love you.
Love you too. Bye. Let's see. Wait. It was Fear and Loathing and 12 Monkeys, which syncs Southbound next. It's a good horror movie, and instead of doing all this like twisted shit, like a lot of new horror movies, like that Key and Peele, Jordan Peele movie, you know, like and like every movie is sort of this statement on things, which I find enormously boring, but this is just like gore and shit. And, you know, there's of course like the horror element of manipulation and being lost in a place surrounded by bad people. Like, there's this one cool scene where they just tell him over the radio how to kind of resurrect a girl from another timeline in the story, and they make him just like crush her lungs, which I found like really cool. How it's a simple thing, but it's kind of horrifying, more than just like some other complicity or, you know. Pontypool. It's a Canadian zombie movie, and it gets political, but in an interesting way that's in sync with plot mechanics. And, like, you know, unlike a lot of stuff which kind of has this like whole swell to it where you can tell they're like adding more and more, I think I can tell with this movie that from the first place they were trying to say stuff about how words infect your mind, which I found interesting. Oh brother, where art thou? This is a movie where they go places and it's fun. No Country for Old Men is like this sort of classic, like, oh, that would be your favorite movie, but I'd also say this is further down on the list, tentatively, at least with respect to if I have to watch it again, because, you know, you get like what you get out of it, and it's like, okay, but I'm not as into that sort of movie because it's just, well, but, you know, interesting characters. It's a good movie. And good pacing. Then, no, The Man Who Wasn't There is much better sort of elaboration on that sort of thing, but it gets clunkier in the plot with these sort of, you know, and that's weird because you'd say, oh, it's linked to this classic philosopher story, like Camus, The Stranger. But, you know, any of the philosophical rambling, it gets into that personality and that trying to lash out. And I think when you try to, like, write out this scenario and be, like, in this court case against shit, I don't know, it just gets kind of abstract, but I still do like it in a lot of aspects more than No Country for Old Men, because it has that sort of character dynamic, but it explains the characters more. The sort of No Country for Old Men thing allows stuff like the Joker, which I'm like, that's cool, I kind of like it, but people are like, oh, I like this character, he's like me, that's cringe. I'm not saying that's bad, but, you know, it's cringe. Blue Ruin. It's a revenge movie. He really does look homeless, which I liked. That effort was what gone into it. Like, Oldboy, the guy in that looks genuinely like he was in some place for like 20 years. Oh, I was left off at Amores Perros. The guy in this also looks homeless. And, you have these three storylines and these three kind of slices of life where, like, you can sense the despair and the sort of ambition and shit, but it's all with this sort of, like, pace to it, you know? And this sort of exteriority, like with how, at the end, Gil Garcia Bernal's, you know, crush moves away to, like, the northwest of Mexico, I think, Guadalajara. Parasite, it's another one of those, like, complicated, abstruse movies that actually happen really smoothly. And, you know, I rewatched it recently, and I think it's, like, in the middle of the list of that. But it really does have this, like, contrast to it. Like, it reminded me of going to different houses, which were, you know, much more upscale and shit, and it just didn't really, like, emphasize it too much. It just, you don't even see, like, the second floor, much of the second floor in this house, which makes me imagine it as relatively small compared to some houses I've been in. But, you know, like, the whole, like, placement of the house matters more, because, you know, their house floods in the movie. There's a bunch of that little shit, which is interesting, like, in the sort of way that in The King of Comedy, there's these character bits that complicate. King of Comedy, I also put that on. That's probably the best Scorsese movie, because, you know, like, I was thinking After Hours, but, you know, King of Comedy, and of course, Wolf of Wall Street, but King of Comedy is just this, like, that's me. That's practically me. I like that guy. I have to. Ravenous. It's set in the West, and it's about cannibals. This cannibal guy after the Civil War, and he's eating people. It's great. Dans ma peau. It's this pretentious, like, French extremity shit with cannibalism, and it's okay. Raw, by Decornu. It's great. It's total waifu. Total waifu. Total waifu. The Fly. It's a good romance movie at first, and you can kind of see this personality in it. Like, this guy sort of feels like a scientist with how he behaves and how he talks. You know, he doesn't feel like some kind of, like, schlub. But then he turns into this fly beast, and you sort of see these, like, childish understandings of what that sort of chimera would be, which is interesting. Last Night, also a Cronenberg film. I think he produced this. And the most interesting thing about this apocalypse movie is that there's just this Asian lady, right, who is one of the main characters, and this guy with the weirdest, like, posh Canadian accent, which I found entertaining. And he's just this sort of, like, someone who, like, posts on Reddit and has, you know, just a little bit of, like, negative karma to have people be like, I don't know how the fuck Reddit works, but to have people be like, you have negative karma. Crash, another Cronenberg movie, and it's good. It's another one of those gore sexuality movies, which I'm like, cool. Gore sexuality, like Oldboy, like Crank, kind of. Like Only God Forgives. It's a linkage. If you think about it, it's kind of smart. And yeah, Crash, probably the best movie ever. eXistenZ, Cronenberg put people in a video game before Japan did, and you know, it's kind of a mess, but it's kind of fun too. And there's this like meta element to it where it's not just a video game, but neither is it this like being smart with you narrative, like, oh, but he's a government, so if he wanted to shoot people, he can shoot people because he plays a video game. No, it like gets at like what it actually means to be a gamer or to become a gamer somewhat. And related to Crash, same author, is High Rise, a Ben Wheatley movie, and that is just this like Apocalypse Now sort of like movie of this kind of ambiguity going into megalomania, and you don't expect it at all. It's cool. But just this whole apartment design, which is easily more impressive, I think, than, like, at least what I've seen of Blade Runner. Like, Blade Runner feels mostly stylistic, and sort of, me personally, I prefer to see the structural implications rather than the social implications of how like a city is designed. The sort of that's the sort of division between Star Wars and Star Trek, I think, because Star Trek, you have these planets which take a more like, you know, that Japanese series with all the ranks and stuff, like planetary approach, and more myopic, like sort of Lord of the Ringsy, which is why Star Wars isn't like Lord of the Rings, because it's not specific with like the fantasy worlds it builds. Even when it is specific, it's not specific, and when it does have politics, to my knowledge, the politics are retarded, and simplistic, symbolic, or whatever you want to say. It's just, you know, more sort of flourish, icing on the cake. And with High Rise, just in this huge building, like a lot of Cronenberg movies, there's like aesthetic, but it always serves functionality. And this functionality is like paralleled to how, you know, cities are these massive centers of wealth, and like the bottom end languages, while the top end kind of, in this weird manipulation of architecture and logistics, just flourishes because it overproduces. So definitely great. Kill List, another Ben Wheatley film. It's about being hitmen, but instead of being like, oh, these hitmen are like so cool and stuff, you get a insight into this guy with his desperation to express his moral compass in this melancholic life he leads. And in the end, you see that sort of collective reference to morality with how he gets inducted into this cult after killing his family. Visitor Q, someone fucks some woman, and then he's like, oh, it's shit. It's a miracle. She shit herself. Greatest movie of all time. The Wind. Lillian Gish. Great character. Sort of like just this Eastern promises. And, then the West doesn't fulfill the promises. In a lot of ways, this movie is like a Dead Man. Dead Man is another one on this list, and it just has this one cut especially that's on, I think, the website that isn't YouTube, with a special cut for the music, which is just insanely atmospheric, more sort of like Melvin sounding, a bit Indian. And it's a simple psychological drama of this woman moving to the West, and she tries to find a husband. It's sort of like that Coen Brothers movie again, that one segment. But, it's just a fucking hell with, like, tornadoes and shit, and she goes insane, and I think she kills her husband or something accidentally. But really great. Lillian Gish, one of the... Yeah! Field in England. It's sort of like the Wind in character, with this sort of no way in, no way out setting. Just very claustrophobic. And wow, I'm getting tired. Ghost in the Shell. Great sort of world building in, out. You see the city. I had to go inside. And it's sort of better than Blade Runner in a way, because you see the sort of borderings of the city and the domestication of it. Paprika. It's about dreams, and it's really cool. And the sort of Kaufman-esque, like, as in the movie Schenectady, New York, talking about the the polysemy of dreams, like, as in what you want to do, what you dream of in your sleep. Barking dogs never bite. That's a movie about killing dogs, like Amores Perros. So, it's great. And it expresses this sort of frustration with the character. That's not just like some sort of anti-hero or whatever. It's just, you sort of see his position, and it's not this sort of handholdy thing. You just understand he's sort of a shit person, but you still kind of like him, because he has this, he's not like bitchy about stuff, he just gets stuff done. Malkovich, being John Malkovich, good concept to a movie, really that's how a lot of these could be explained. Is good concept and the execution doesn't defeat the point of the concept. Like Pontypool, the concept was built upon, and they didn't have to add like in confusion and sort of ways for people to interpret the shit, uh, which is like Donnie Darko, another one of those psychological things. Psychological things don't have to be complicated, but if you try to make them like dramatic, then I don't know, it's just psychology isn't dramatic. The being John Malkovich is basically psychological because you become John Malkovich, but you cannot see around the bend, can you? But that doesn't mean it still isn't there. And so, Donnie Darko, for instance, gets this picture of this vagrant state, sort of restless teen, but you're not really like on his side, and he's not really himself too concerned, which is the interesting part about it, because what makes his illness, stick out is that he doesn't treat it soon enough. But it's one of those 12 Monkeys things, but here more focused on the dramatic standpoint instead, where, it all kind of figures into itself. More is from America. This is an underrated A24 one. And it's just the black guy from The Office and his son in Germany. It has some parallels to Ladybird with just the attitude of being in a culture that you don't quite understand with this sort of sophistication to it. And then another interesting part of it is like this black kid trying to be hardcore and his sort of preconceptions of himself, as well as being like inauthentic, are also clashing against this German view of extremity, which is like, oh, techno music. Let the right one in. It's a vampire movie, but it's a good vampire movie because the vampire is a 12-year-old girl. Any other vampire would not be interesting. A male vampire, a female vampire, maybe a boy vampire. But vampires are generally just these, like, children. So it's like, eh. Dead presidents. This is better than Do the Right Thing. Do the Right Thing is shit. Dead presidents, that's good. The drive of the movie is the moral ambiguity. But it's not about whether you root for the person. It's about how he changes from this sort of social guy to someone who isn't willing to take shit. Like the transition with his attitude toward the guy he usually plays pool with before and after the war. And how war changes you and sort of molding you, whether or not you stay the same, you're sort of shaped by being shot at in the fact that you either need to adapt or you need to continually justify why you aren't adapting. Midnight in Paris, Woody Allen, going back in time to see, Hemingway.
It's just cool, and you can see the sort of like the small text said large, with Hemingway just being like, "Oh, dude, she's cheating on you," which, you know, Woody Allen movies make me wonder if it's really all that obvious in the real world how people act. Because, when you like watch a whole lot of Woody Allen movies, you can just like tell it all. And depending on the sort of performances, it can be very entertaining, you know. So, they don't have to have all this like turnarounds and stuff. So though a lot of Woody Allen movies have this very uh, cutting line factory approach, it's like it's a good formula always. VHS, a horror movie about, it's a found footage movie that's actually good because it actually finds stuff. It doesn't just like make the stuff to find, like the found footage Maryland bullshit. That movie is boring as shit. Whatever that was called. Uh, with a witch. Strozek. I barely remember anything from this movie. It's about this German who moves to America, so sort of like the opposite of Morris from America. Uh, but the ending scene is great. It's just like, oh, hey, oh, hey. Rushmore. I had to include a few Wes Anderson movies on this list. At first, it was only A Life Aquatic, which I hear people discount because it's like derivative, but it's just like anything that takes place on the water is cool. But Rushmore, it's again this kid, which you just have to like. And Rushmore is related to Napoleon Dynamite, where Napoleon Dynamite is almost like the good version of Rushmore, Mr. Rushmore from Rushmore. And the cool guy. It takes place in Idaho, the light version of Iowa, and it's a good movie with the cool looking guy and his friends, and vote for Pedro. You should, Elephant Sitting Still. It's another one of those hyperlink cinema joints, and it's Chinese. Hugo, he killed himself. It was his first film, and it was his last film. It was best of times, it was worst of times, and you just get this, sense of despair and anger. More importantly, anger with just people, stuck in these situations that they precipitated. The boy, he pushed this other boy down the stairs to, protect his friend who he believed didn't steal his phone. He did actually steal. You motherfucker! He like yells out of the train tracks. It's a cool scene. You can just see this Chinese guy getting fucking pissed off. What else can I say? And this like crime guy killing his best friend. The boy's girlfriend is having sex with the principal, and it takes place in this like suburb of Beijing, and there's this symbolism stuff. Bananas. It's probably my least favorite of the 5 Woody Allen movies on here, but it's still this really cool concept where it's just he's in this Latin American country, and he's doing this sort of thing against the coup, and when the sort of revolutionaries get in power, right, and one becomes a dictator, then he becomes the one in power. It's a bunch of like Vampire Weekend bullshit. But really funny, and just like you think it's going to be a normal Woody Allen film, then it becomes a good Woody Allen film. Whoa, Choke. It's from the same guy as Fight Club. It's about the sex addict, and it visits the same vein I like so much of you don't like the character or dislike the character. It's just an interesting character, with these sort of pros and cons to it. And Kelly MacDonald is in it, which is very important. A wacky plot, and Fight Club. I'm guessing it's kind of retarded too, based from this. But this movie is just good retarded, good, and it's sort of like a good version of Train Spotting, which also has Kelly MacDonald, where it's just similarly themed around addiction, but to this sort of like wholesome sort of Sion Sono wholesome way. And I said it was the first film, it was his last film with Hugo and Elephant Sitting Still. Much Ado About Nothing. That's Shakespeare. And the 90s version of that is pretty great. All the actors are good. It's just some British movie of all the British movies. But I like the female lead. The male lead has a lot of pizzazz to him. I like him. And, it's just my kind of movie. It's like a Woody Allen movie, practically. Crank. No, I already did Crank. Night Comes for Us is, to my knowledge, like those movies, The Raid and The Raid 2 Redemption. The Raid Redemption, where it's just like this constant threat of characters dying and just these pulsating action scenes. And the beginning and the middle are the best. The ending sort of slacks a bit. It becomes monotonous. It doesn't quite end, like put in more things. But the action is all like cool, all palpable, all sort of like, visible with kind of good lines of sight and axes to it. Like one thing is happening here, one thing is happening there, one thing is happening there. It doesn't get like too cluttered with it, with how they kind of do the cinematography of it. Slow West, As the Gods Will. This is a movie similar to a Sion Sono movie I was just about to get to, and it's this death game movie, which is just bizarre, by Takashi Miike, and it gets to this sort of red oni, blue oni, I don't know, the straight man in the foil, and there's a Japanese trope similar to it, but Takashi Miike is like a straight man who's barely even straight. Where his movie is just taken so kind of like on the nose, and at the end of the movie you just have this like CGI'd sort of like hollow bastion castle scape with endless expanse outside, sort of also like Dark Souls. It's a trip, certainly. Really retarded, really good. And the Sion Sono movie that it's like is Tag, and Tag is, I've heard, a sort of spin on the Last Girl trope, sort of like It Follows, which also should be on my list, but I forgot it. It Follows is a really good movie with a very straightforward message, and it's good, and it has a sense of setting, sort of like the show in Indiana about the 80s, and it's just this atmospheric piece, which I think a lot of horror should try more to be, rather than trying to be this sort of like symbolism, because the more you get into symbolism, it's sort of like, if I'm thinking, I'm not scared. I mean, so that's tag the last girl trope, where this Japanese girl, she just goes to multiple alternative worlds where her classmates are all killed off. Then she goes to this final world, which is like the Stone Tower Temple, the Stone Temple Pilots, and Zelda Majora's Mask, and it's just this god tells her like, oh, da, 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 and she's like, fuck you. Great movie. Ley Lines, another Takashi Miike movie, and this is about the Taiwanese first generation or second generation, children of Taiwanese immigrants, who are mainland Chinese, I think, team up with this prostitute to like fight the mob and sell like toluene, and it all sort of surmounts in this like more character-centered struggle than a lot of Takashi Miike's movies, which are more like conflict-centered. On the Waterfront, like Kazan is a total fucking scab, but I don't care about the politics of individual directors. And of course, like Kazan, I believe, was a leftist, but he was still, just a bastard. But On the Waterfront has this interesting sort of politics to it, rather. It's like very 50s leftist, with Christian influence, with this individualist American exceptionalism. Another movie which should be on the list is They Live, or no? The movie with Rodney Dangerfield, or Rodney Piper. But On the Waterfront is, this interesting depiction. It's multiracial too, of just this job that you normally wouldn't think about, just people who carry things around and away from boats. Then Michel Gondry. Filmography: Microbe and Gasoline. This is the best kids movie there is. It's just about these kids who build a fucking car and then they drive it through France. And it gets, just enough of a sort of slice of a realistic teen life where, the kid gets a shit haircut where he has to turn it into a bald head from this Chinese prostitute. And you have this other kid who's from, a rougher sort of family, a poorer sort of family. Audrey Tautou is in it, who's in Amelie. But, it's a cool movie, very whimsical. And I like whimsy. You could say it's a bit Wes Anderson-y. Amelie, this is the most anime sort of... It's basically like March Comes In Like the Lion, the French movie. And the first time I watched it, I was just like, oh, she's cool. And the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, she has a statement about me, because I watched an analysis video that was all like, oh, here's the point to this movie, is that she's an unhealthy person. And I was like, oh, okay, I see, that's interesting. So I got that whole Life Aquatic, the father-son relationship is cool. Death Proof, the coolest fucking car chase scene I've seen, with this sort of multi-dimensionality to it. They go up hills and all that stuff. And the sort of transition from, people say the first characters are like annoying and hateable, but I'm sort of like, no, they're kind of just human. They're just a bunch of people visiting each other. But, like, I don't view that as sexist to depict more unskilled, unsophisticated people. I don't, like, that's the weird thing about depictions is, can you not depict someone who's negative as someone who, you want to like, yay, women. Because I get, like, you don't have to depict all women as negative, sure. But, like, my problem gets when, like, you don't want negative people to be portrayed as certain groups, because it's like negative people are people too, less skilled, less sympathetic. Alloys, it's a Swiss movie about this guy whose father recently died, and this woman takes all of his sort of surveillance stuff that he gets on other people, which has this, sort of YouTube parallel to it, of him documenting these people's lives. He's a very interesting character with how he is interested, but on this very, and the film is spelled Aloys, interested on this very categorical, archival view of things. Me and you are having fun today. What's my battery at? 30%. I've been filming this for 50 minutes. So that means 70% of my battery went away in 50 minutes. Yeah. So that's... What was that movie I just fucking mentioned? Alloys. Just like a psychological take. It was one of those low fantasy movies I was watching. And then he meets this woman, and they create a media experience actually over the phone, which leads to this really interesting dynamic where you're not quite sure what's really happening. It's sort of like the reverse Amélie. Amélie is how it's pronounced, but Amélie. If that will frustrate anyone, I like it. Liza the Fox Fairy is kind of this movie about, it's sort of like a Pushing Daisies influenced thing. And this woman, she was serving this old Japanese ambassador's wife. And there's this one Japanese rock star who is haunting every man who tries to fall in love with her. And then this police assistant, ends up bearing all of the injury of, not being aware he's falling in love with her, and like fixing all the stuff around her apartment, which is all derelict and stuff. And I think it gets this good picture of I believe it's set up in the Lies of the Fox Fairy. Wasn't it Czech? Lies of the Fox Fairy. I would highly recommend Hungarian. Yeah. Hungary looks, I think, better than the Czech Republic. You know, hot take there. Beep. Intolerance? What the fuck is intolerance? I can't tolerate this. Oh yes, Intolerance is a D.W. Griffith film, and it's the usual apologetic sort of thing for his career. And the whole movie is kind of boring because it just gets history and does like different things. But the most interesting part of the movie, I think, is the one set in ancient Persia, I believe, where it's just, the set design is like magnificent, and the scale is better than, like bullshit like Transformers. You think you're looking at a phone and you see a movie? You're being ripped off. And other stuff in the movie is, much more boring. Oh, Ancient Babylon. But then the other three movies, I mean, I guess the modern story, the fourth, is also interesting, but the French story and the story of Jesus are just kind of bullshit. But overall, it just has, you could put it on in the background, like a Koyani Katsi sort of shit. And it's this interesting thing overall with, like, hints to all the stuff, which you might get something out of. I'd probably put it fairly low on my list. Then, wait, where's the fucking pin? You put, it follows. This is terribly sorted. What did I mention? Yeah, I was going up this column instead of down. Mysterious Skin. It's a queer movie for the gays, for the fags. And it's great. I don't know how accurate it is with, like, the gay rape scene and, the molester who turned him into, who kind of, like, got him into his sexual kind of, like, groove. But, there's a lot of interesting characters, including Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it. Like, in this Nebraskan setting, it's not just, like, desiccated, it's also, it has some life to it. And there's, like, an inside and an outside. There's, like, a setting to it. And there's, a sort of peopling to the movie with, like, a, he gets his dick sucked in, as a baseball announcer. But there's also, an acknowledgement of, like, the rural place where people feel like in Nebraska you can't get STDs, unlike in New York. Then there's a scene with, like, a guy with AIDS who just asked for a massage. There's a lot of feeling to it. Look of Silence. I already talked about that one. It's about the Indonesian slaughter of 1 million people in 1965. Night of the Living Dead. It's a good zombie movie, and really it's a good sort of structuring a story in general to this myopic focus of this guy. You know, you see him from far out at the end where he's shot. Good atmosphere, good black and white movie. Ugh. Possession, another one of the gore movies. Like, she puts her arm into this like meat slicer, and I'm like, yeah, one of those gore sex. In 1 minute, so I should go upstairs. Take the Money and Run. That's a movie where Woody Allen is an incompetent thief. It's great. It's sort of funny. It's really funny. Sweet and Lowdown is a Woody Allen movie. That's a mockumentary. It's sort of like the opposite of a Llewyn Davis. Outside Llewyn Davis, about this guy, I feel like Woody Allen is arguing he's sort of like, maybe, I don't know. No, probably not. But just this Sean Penn is the standoffish guy, and the mute is really cute. She's a waifu. See, then I think I did this row. It Stains the Sand Red. This is a very, like, probably no one has seen this because I intentionally go through charts, but it's a zombie movie which has a sort of comedy to it, but the comedy takes in account the sort of nature of the zombies with having some sort of intelligence, where she's chased around by this zombie after, you know, in the middle of, you know, the desert. It picks off her boyfriend, who's obviously a kind of like muscly pussy, I guess. And then she's just too sort of feeble, I guess, to fight it. There's not enough sort of big rocks. But when she is able to like trap it and kill it, she just doesn't have, you know, she sees something in its eye. And so then she just transports it around and becomes like it. But then it's killed in the second act of the movie. You can tell she has more of a connection by then to the zombie than the people who are just kind of like, you can't bring that fucking zombie into the military base. She's like, well, fuck you. So she just goes to where they were going originally, which is this crime place. And the people there leave by helicopter. But she eventually finds the keys that were left there by the other crime guy and goes to find her son. And that's the end of the movie. It's a good, you know, zombie movie. It has like a drama to it. It incorporates the zombie element in this very simple way at first. In this sort of, you know, she's just walking through the desert. Naked Lunch. I fell asleep to this movie, but it's fucking, you know, it's like 50s, but like much better. This guy just, it's based on a true story of this guy sniffing insecticide and his wife too, and then he kills his wife and he has to run away to Europe. There's a bunch of bug people too. Great. Almost Famous, it's a rock star movie, and is another interesting character that I relate to, because he's a sort of nerd that's not the obsessive nerd, but he's just, you know, like the like careerist, sort of interested, intellectual. You know, he gets these rock albums from his sister, you know, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. and then he builds this sort of mythology around it. You know, he's a bit autistic, but he's cool. He's cool about it. He's too sort of introverted to end up being just like a dork. And he becomes this like music journalist, and it's based on a true story. Die andere Heimat. It's Home from Home, Chronicle of a Vision. And this was a really boring movie, but I'd put it near the bottom of my list. It's a German movie about this guy who wants to move to South America, and it has these like color tints to it, which are interesting and sort of give like this allusion to modernity, the coming modernity in the 1800s, as seen in Germany. And Germans really are interesting. They're the sort of people who, like in the movie SLC Punk, they're just, you know, you don't really know about them, but they're still cool. You know, at least in media, of course. But here, you just have this guy, he like reads books, and it made me think like, oh yeah, books must have used to be like cool. And he falls in love with this one girl, but the girl moves to Brazil, and it's about his sort of participating in Germany instead, and becoming this like inventor scientist, and making stuff about language. And he's just this kind of interesting footnote in history, you imagine him as, and this like innovator in this one town, which might lead to one thing or the other, but it doesn't really illustrate that much of like that. It's just, you know, like an interesting character. There's one scene where they make wine in the village, and they are really angry, and they're like, oh, we should be able to sell the wine. And he's like, freedom, freedom. And I like that scene in the movie. But then, you know, the character just went a place where I was just like, I don't really relate as much to that, which, I mean, is as interesting as if I did relate to him, maybe. I met Andere. Streetcar Named Desire. It's another Kazan movie. I think it's better than the Union movie, because, you know, it's sort of a feminist movie, but it's also sort of just a movie about how to deal with trauma and with loss, where Marlon Brando becomes what he sort of tries to get rid of. But then when he becomes what he tries to get rid of, then he becomes his own condemnation of that, which is he tries to get rid of, you know, this overly sexually active woman who's the sister of his girlfriend who he's abusive towards. But in the end, he uses the sort of tactics that he feels she uses on him. Jacob's Ladder. It's this new Hollywood sort of myopic approach again, like Night of the Living Dead, where the first scene is this just train scene, and then it's all trippy throughout, sort of like Naked Lunch, and it never like becomes like that technique is, you know, oh, they're using the technique too much. It's just like, you know, anachronicities and different lives he could have had, which are interesting. And, you know, sort of a horror element to it, but also just a sort of morbid, you know, element to it, where which you have with like maybe if you were thinking about something and you were like, maybe this is, you know, speaking of something that shouldn't be spoken of. It's kind of prophesizing something. When you have that sort of anxiety about the implications of stuff, it's that sort of movie, that sort of horror to it. The sort of cosmic horror that you have in real life, with just, you know, you could be put into this war and then you're dead because of some, I don't know if that's based on a true story, this sort of drug they used on people. Is it? I don't know. Southbound. I said that. Bandit Queen. It's this Indian movie about this figure in 80s Indian politics, which you can see the sort of recency in it I found interesting, where people talk about the sort of recent history as though it's a scary thing where, you know, in the 20s, communism happened, the Ayatollah in Iran, modern Islamic reactionary politics. But as much, you also have these groups forming. It's all, whereas political parties are the kind of form of history and power in like the 20s up until maybe the 40s. And then after the 40s, with this sort of party switch in the 60s, people don't take parties seriously anymore. At least in America. Then after that, really people have more of the power, like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, shit, but people have this power that's easily framed by the media. And so I think this movie, for instance, it shows how the Bandit Queen is this sort of feminist figure in Indian politics who, you know, she was married off by her family. Her family didn't really give a fuck about her. She was in this, you know, village in northern India where they speak Hindi. And she joined this thief group where she was also raped in there. But then this one guy saved her. Then, kind of, because it's based on caste, even the thief group, and killed the guy at the top. But then there were traitors in the rank of the group of thieves who, you know, raped her again. There's a lot of rape. And then that guy is also killed. But then she gets revenge on all of them. And it's cool. It's like Kill Bill times 200. Really, like, adventurous movie, like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And really a lot of action. Like, she joins these Muslims, which I guess are more egalitarian, at least here, than the Hindu, the whatever religion. But it's, I'd argue, the most accessible Indian movie I've seen, and the most, you know, stuff to it. And there's no fucking singing in it at all. My Cell 211, Spanish movie. Some guy is in a cell. He's a new employee, and he sort of goes along with stuff and tries to get out. But then when the sort of response from the prison, because there's a prison revolt, toward the people trying to be like, hey, we're concerned about the prisoners inside. There's also, like, Catalonian prisoners are threatened because, you know, they're political prisoners. And there's that whole conflict with Catalonia and its separatism. But his wife ends up dying in in that mess of things. She ends up bashed by this one guy who's really just an asshole, and so he just goes along. He's not on their side anymore. He goes along with the prisoners. And it's this very interesting dynamic. I like Spanish movies because I like the rhythm of their voices more. French movies are a bit more like, and German movies are more like, that's Chinese, but you get my point. And Italian movies are, but Spanish movies are like, sí, amor, VHS. I talked about that, the handheld footage movie, and it's better than that one, The Witch of Witch, the found footage one in the 90s that was very popular, but it's just shit. Maybe interesting to some people, but the locations just, and the action doesn't make any sense. I saw The Devil. Not much of this film, but just Song Kang Ho, Choi Min Suk is a really good bad guy, and you can tell this sort of like politics of just pure antagonists linking together who like eat people or whatever. And then also the fact that it's a revenge movie makes it like this interesting linkage of cat and mouse, like No Country. The Deer Hunter, another Vietnam movie, but this movie is much more naturalistic, much more American, which I feel like a lot of war movies like try to make it this big thing that the Americans did when nobody has perspective of a lot of wars. And here it's just he comes from this suburb of Pittsburgh, which I'm very familiar with because I go to vacation there to see my grandparents. And I like the sort of terrain of it. It's, mountainous, but also, there's these valleys to it. And it's very marked how, like, you go from one place to the other. It's not just, like, generic Americana. And he comes from, this Polish family. He has all this sort of layers to him. That's not just, and then when he comes back from the war, and then Christopher Walken doesn't come back, you're sort of interested in Vietnam itself, and you can see how he takes, the roadmap to it. Russian roulette scene is cool. Then he sort of gets his appreciation for life. Instead of, like, killing the deer, he's just like, fuck it. Then there's that other scene with the guns or something, I guess. I forget what that was. In the cabin. The night's short, walk on, girl. Night is short, walk on, girl. Night is short, walk on, girl. Masaaki Yuasa? Was he on this? But this movie has like a Spirited Away, but it's not as like childish. It's more like beat for beat, and it has the sort of like Wind Daughter and Phil Son thing with just this one schlub guy, this one very go get him girl. It's great. It's a great movie. The night is short. Walk on, girl. Damn. Wow. Wow. Beat Back to the Future 3. That's what I argue best Back to the Future is, because it's also a Western, so it's interesting. Tag. That was the Sion Sono movie. It was the Last Girl Trope movie where the guy at the end in the Stone Temple Majora's Mask dungeon goes like, and she's like, shut the fuck up. It's a great movie. Dog Day Afternoon. Rob a bank movie. Totally gets sympathy, but then they get shot at the end. Fuck. It's sort of like Dead Presidents in a way. That sort of nihilism it takes. It's like, you know, these sympathetic characters, right? Like a Hollywood movie, but then it's like, here's what would fucking happen. You know, you don't let them out. You kind of create a situation where they're culpable. Boogie Nights, 70s porn movie. Great. Good. Inherent Vice is better. But also, you know, 70s. What can you not like? It's a 70s movie that actually looks good and enjoys the 70s in both the serious standpoint and the wacky standpoint. It's a synthesis of the sort of exploitation stuff, like Rudy Dolomite, and the sort of serious new Hollywood stuff. It's like, oh, I'm dating a 17-year-old girl. Therefore, it is good, and that other one is good. Strozak, I talked about that one. German guy. Pi by Darren Aronofsky. Just this mathematician wants to know things about Judaism, and then he finds it out and he drills a hole into his head. And there's drum and bass music. It's great, and it's all in black and white, and it's all sort of Jacob's Ladder-y. You know, it takes place in New York. Good use of New York. Great use of New York. Rocky talked about Record. I don't like Record 2, unlike YMS. I think the sort of supernatural element to that was a bit canned, because, I mean, if it's going to be a sequel, I think even if you're going to introduce that logic, you should introduce it in an organic way. Like, I'm okay with just the zombies being people, not just being these vampires with religion. But Record has this great sort of Resident Evil-y sort of setup to it, similar to Night of the Living Dead, just like it zooms in on stuff so it doesn't lose its plot. Pulse, whereas, you know, Resident Evil takes place in a mansion, or in 2 it takes place in a police station and in this underground lab, and 3 it takes place in these series of like back streets and stuff in this weird like Japanese video game city. You know, I don't know how accurate that is. Might be accurate, but I doubt those angles. Maybe that claustrophobia. Resident Evil Code Veronica takes place in a prison and, you know, just an island. You know, it's closed in. But then Silent Hill, you have more of a sense of like you can get around places you wouldn't expect to get around. So that's my sense of the movie Pulse, with these like bizarre boundaries to them. And, you know, places where you should or shouldn't go. Good Japanese movie, kind of like The Ring, but more sort of socially conscious to this introversion of Japan. Lisa and David. This is a 60s movie about just mental illness, but taken from this sort of cute, understanding sort of way, which is like, I was touched, and this other woman is like, Dandy Randy, I do not like Sandy, and apparently she was raped or something. I don't know if like multiple personality just means you're gonna like rhyme words, and I don't know if that guy with maybe OCD is even that natural of a guy with OCD, but it's a very interesting whether or not, you know, the mental illness is are accurate. It's an interesting character stuff with like the difficulties they face and how they get over those difficulties. Don't Breathe. This takes place also in Michigan, like It Follows. And I think what Don't Breathe does better is show like how shit Detroit is. It's just like, it almost looks like Vietnam or Thailand or the Philippines, because it's just like overgrown in a lot of places, and it's just this one guy's house with like bars on it. You know, a great sort of combination of the open and closed aesthetics of horror, and where she gets out and she's put back in. When she gets out again, you have a sort of parallel to like when she got out at first. So then it's like, it like the sequel bait is retarded, right? But it has a point to it emotionally, like the inside and the outside. I think it's a good depiction of that part of Detroit, even if it's really exaggerated and stuff. Like how House of Cards is allegedly a good depiction of Washington, D.C. I think that's probably retarded. No, nothing works like that. Nothing works like that Game of Thrones bullshit. You know, a much better, more realistic system for DC would be Burn After Reading. Is Burn After Reading on my list? I forget. I don't know. I guess I could put it on. And Burn After Reading is just these spies doing spy stuff. So then, Into the Wild is Khaki King is on the soundtrack. Khaki King is great. I figured out about her before this movie, but you know, this guy goes to Alaska. I fell asleep to the movie, but you know, as far as I saw, it was an okay movie. Maybe a bit prestige, but you know, he just dies at the end. It's an interesting picture of stuff rather than just a cynical picture. It's this sort of entropic picture, which isn't, you know, to say cynical. You know, he does what he wants, but you know, it's, you could view it as him doing what he wants. You know, that doesn't work. And that's similar to The Rambler, which is an acid western like Dead Man, which you just have this guy gets out of prison, fuck his wife. His wife is a bitch. I'm not even saying that in a sexist way, or like, oh, she's behaving in a bad way. Like, literally everyone around him is assholes, and they're like, oh, you get fucked in the ass. And he's just this quiet guy. And it's this surreal movie, and the acid western is about how his sort of cool character is too much to deal with this, like, scientist who blows people's heads up trying to see their dreams. But then Into the Wild, yeah, I'd say that's like that. And then Dead Man is the sort of The Wind, but a guy, and that's by Jim Jarmusch. There was also another Jim Jarmusch movie I was trying to think of that I forgot to put on. And Dead Man is this sort of vampire weekendy, other cultures exist, dumb white man thing. But in the end, it's just, entertaining. So that Johnny Depp shoots and shoots. It has this sort of folk story telling to it. But the folk story it's telling is all sort of, pithy and good. It's not, like, ever, self-important. And this, like, there was a white guy and he was friends with an Indian, and this is cool. It's just like, this Indian guy likes this one, David Blake or whatever, writer guy, poet. Beyond the Black Rainbow. Yeah, that's one of the Colors movies I like. I fell asleep to that, and it has a lot of colors. There's a Death Grips video or two. I think like you can just look up Death Grips Beyond the Black Rainbow, and it's very colorful, kind of like a 2000: A Space Odyssey, but better. Probably not in plot, but 2000: Space Odyssey is shit, anyways. Love Exposure. Sion Sono. It's this epic about orienting yourself in a way proper to romance rather than to familial sort of exception, where this kid tries to be proper, but trying to be proper, he loses sight of anything trying to be anything, and then he finds a love in this one girl he equates to Virgin Mary, though he's completely perverse and does like panty shots. That's all like for the memes. Tokyo Tribe, that's a musical sort of West Side Story, different. It's sort of like what was that movie? It was in black and white, and it had the guy in Children of Men, but different sort of dimensions of crime and sort of countercultures just beating the shit out of each other. And there's this one fan that like kills everyone. It's good. He was in the movie Sin City. Yeah, Sin City 2, I think, is what I'm talking about. But it's Sin City 2 with all those relations, but much more interesting. Like a Romeo and Juliet, sort of one family fighting the other, but it's four families in this sort of conflict, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, or like all of the Greeks, the disparate Greeks versus the Turks. And there's just, it's so immature, it's so great. Why don't you play in hell? This is the greatest movie ever, and it's about this team, perseverance, they gain their dream after 10 years of filming these two Yakuza groups killing each other. And then they get killed at the end, but then one guy survives and delivers the tapes, and it shows them all with, like, one guy had a sword through his head, then he just, like, sword fishes through the fucking wall, and he's, like, just a Terminator with the girl he fell in love with, who was running away from her father because she didn't want to be an actress in these small parts anymore. And he's just like, hey, 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 he's a sword through his head. And then he runs toward the police officers, but then they shoot him because they think he's trying to stab them. It's delightful. But then at the end of the movie, he's at the intro or the opening of the movie, and he just has bandages around his head and everything. One of the bosses had his head cut off. He just has bandages around his neck. It's about pure unconsequential violence. And, like, how would they even, like, film a Yakuza fight? How would you get that much footage from that Yakuza fight? How do you script it out? There's this whole question as to, like, how are they going to make the movie? But then they just make the movie. They have all the, like, gear and stuff. There's this whole joke with the audio guy. It's great. The opposite crime boss is a fanboy of the other boss's daughter because she's too badass and surfed in blood. 2046. A Wonkar Y1. It was in the future, and it must have been good. I didn't understand most of it, but it was pretty good. And it had a lot of subtext to it. Naked, a British movie. It's just funny how depraved these people are. A lot of other movies, people are just depraved, and it's like, I'm supposed to be like, I don't like what they're doing. I find it but here it's just like this one psycho where, he's just fully having his own way, and you just, like, hate him because he's this posh guy. And the other guy goes away, and he's welcomed in by this security guard. He's welcomed in by this one woman. He's raping a woman at the beginning. He's just this intellectual like me. Only God Forgives. It's a colorful movie. He gets his hands cut off. I talked about it. Dead Man, Crash, Her by Spike Jonze. I have 3 of his movies on here, and it's good. You can see Los Angeles expanded out, and the relationship between the two of them is very natural, even though, he must, like, really get a feel for, like, technological relationships and sort of formats and how that sort of programming would work when the program almost becomes to please you by being able to be unpleasing to a bit of an extent. Darjeeling Unlimited. It's in India, and it's a Wes Anderson movie, and it's just like they get this spiritual enlightenment, and it's half, like, retarded, just from the start. Owen Wilson crashed his bike, and he's like, I want to find ourselves out. Then they actually find themselves out by looking at their past, which is, who would have figured that you would have to look at your past? Very Vampire Weekendy movie. Office Space. Now, this movie is a meme. This movie is the one movie where people understand that you should just like the character, regardless of what he does. And what he does is have a lot of fun. And he has fun. I have fun. You have fun. We have fun together. Blind Chance. That's a Polish movie. It's based on this one Woody Allen movie, but I think it's better than it. About people coming out from the screen and doing stuff, but this sort of communist background makes a theme of censorship more meaningful, because it's like when you like censor films, who the fuck cares? But then when it's like when the films fight back, that's an interesting part to it. And just this guy who used to be this artist himself, you get more depth, you get more of a center of focus than the Woody Allen movie, which becomes this art movie that is a bit pointless. It doesn't have a focus, which is my criticism of his sort of art movies, like the one where a bunch of people are his fan. That's actually where the people are his fan is an interesting part. This 8.5 parody. But when you try to take on that sort of smart concept, but you don't make a motor for it, you don't make it like grinding, you don't make it unrealistic in the world, feel unrealistic in the world. You're just like, oh, this must be the communists. I think that was a bit lazy. And the guy just comes out of the TV. It was more interesting, I think, in the Polish movie, too, when it was just this American guy in a Polish movie. Or was it? I don't fucking know. Lady Bird. You know, like, Morris from America. It takes place in Sacramento, and it gave me a picture of Sacramento. I'm very interested in locations in movies. It's just a sprawl of city. It's sort of like Death Grips calls it. And the Sacto Asshole. And the character, you know, it's sort of Napoleon Dynamite-y, but it's like a less genuine Napoleon Dynamite, but it's more driven, more specifically driven towards something or other. It's an interesting depiction. Coonskin, it's the best movie ever, and it's like a Dead Presidents. No, it's not like Dead Presidents. It's sort of like Dead Presidents. It has that sort of aspect of like black individualism or whatever. You know, like how black culture changes over time, because usually it's about being cool, or you know, it's about like being chill and shit. But like after the Vietnam War, you can't be chill with like these fucking like snakes in the grass. So in the same respect, Coonskin is about these like people from the South who during the Harlem Renaissance go to the North, and they're like, oh, we can take over this shit. It's very interesting. And it has like subplots to it, like it has a sort of Raging Bull story inside of it. Death and all that stuff. A lot of blood too. It's good. And it's also extremely funny. The Signal, that's another horror movie from Bruckner, along with Southbound and VHS. All of them partly from Bruckner. But The Signal here is just a third of people have gone crazy. And the interesting part to it is just how, you know, they use that dimension of it, and you don't expect who thinks who is crazy, who is actually crazy in homicidal. And there's a good sort of before and after to it. You know, like when you're playing an RPG, like there's a Final Fantasy IX where your attack stat, you can't use any weapons anymore, I believe, and you can only use magic. Or like Final Fantasy III, where you go into the castle, then you have to go up the whole castle, and then you have to go into, you know, basically points of no return. And I feel like that uses it well. The Dictator. I haven't seen the other Sacha Baron Cohen movies, but The Dictator is good. And it's funny. I don't know if it's as funny as the others, but it's pretty fucking funny. And, you know, it really says a lot about modern politics without even trying to. Without even, you know, actually doing so, even in abstract. The Chaser, South Korean movie, ticking clock, serial killer, pimp, used to be a cop, and it's great. It uses the sort of terrain and interpolation of, you know, data well, and, you know, it's just horrible shit happens, like, constantly. This one girl is being blamed for some murders. The guy's let out, like, twice in a row. People are like, I've heard people are like, oh, this is unrealistic, but it's like, it actually happened. So shut the fuck up. The Obvious Child, A24, one of those things. Jenny Slate, it's sort of an interesting depiction of this New York stuff. And she's like, you know, I wouldn't be a fan of this comedy per se, but it's like interesting comedy, sure. It's an, if not like at least an interesting comedian enough. And her sort of one night stand or whatever, which she gets pregnant from, it's a good sort of drama, and it's a good sort of simple tie a bow around a thing, sort of middle-aged comedian thing, which it if you, it's one of those ordinary movies that's very good, like Lady Bird. I think it's better than Lady Bird too. Whatever that says. Crows 2. Crows 2 is a Takashi Miike film about a school and the fighting in the school, which is good. Crows 2 is good. Let's just say that. Goku, that's another Takashi Miike film. Pigs, cows, giving birth to your own death through a ladle in your asshole. These are all things that we enjoy happening when we get a haircut. Stand By Me. You know, this is my favorite sort of, like, four kids in, like, an adventure movie, kids movie that I've seen at least. And it sort of has this, you know, like, half mature, half childish tone. Or it's just like, oh, cool, cool, cool. It's a cool movie. And I also like, stand by me. Darling, darling, stand by me. With Nail and Die, British movie, good sense of terrain, good Jimi Hendrix songs, and a sort of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas likely thing. And just this paranoia in a changing sort of England. It's an interesting depiction of that time period versus like a, I don't know, that mini series about the scandals of the British monarchy and how like there was a sexual revolution over there also. Whatever. Last Night, that's a Canadian movie with the guy with the posh accent. The Rambler, that's a western with a guy who gets out of prison. Hugo is also the best children's movie. And it's just great. It looks like a cartoon. It looks painterly. Like that's the best Scorsese has ever done. And like I don't even like Scorsese that much. But this is the greatest movie of all time. And I've never said that before. But, all the performances are great. Has this like, wacky atmosphere while being grounded in this sort of like it's about film, it's about this mildly fascinating thing of George Méliès and all these different aspects of France. And like it has a very Harry Potter thing to it, but Harry Potter, if you actually explored all the stuff you read in Harry Potter, if I do say so myself. Last Picture Show with Jeff Bridges. This is another one of those sort of ordinary movies, but it's a bit more like whereas With Nail and Eyes, the translation of the UK through the sexual revolution. The Last Picture Show is sort of to say, these things have always been happening, and to say this sort of always dying lifestyle of rural America and sort of depressed and networking, how it's always been, same as it ever was. It's a really interesting movie. And it's one where it's like you don't really need the context of the time or the context of some movement or of some like way of displaying characters to get how the characters are feeling. It's like 40 years after, the characters aren't necessarily stylized in one way or the other. Jeff Bridges acts more or less like he would in any other movie. Xuan Zang, that's Xuanzang. Wong Kar-wai was the assistant. No. I think he was the producer on this. And it's about this guy, he's a Buddhist, and he goes all the way to India. One of those adventure flicks. And it's just very epic. Very epic. Very, very locations. And simple sort of pithy dialogue with different histories to it, like, should I stay or should I go now? If I don't, there will be trouble. If I do, there will be double. So to come on and let me know, should I stay or should I go? And he goes to India, of course. Through the fucking desert. Fallen Angels, another Wong Kar-wai. And this movie was supposed to be an accompanying piece to Chungking Express. Chungking Express, I think, is pure in that you can see more of a mainline. You could compare Wong Kar-wai's movies to Acupuncture in that it tries to get at these emotions by, getting to the bodily sort of mental workings of them. And that's why I think they can be so philosophical, is because they're trying to get at the sort of universal expression of these particular experiences we have in life, like breakups and, you know, meeting people, falling in love, meeting them and they're different the next time. But Fallen Angels, you know, whereas Chungking Express is one of those more main lines, I feel like Fallen Angels is more like being the body itself with all the intricacies of vascular stuff. In the Mood for Love, this is a more podunk Wong Kar-wai movie and more kind of crime focused than the others. And, you know, to the extent that it shows the amount to which these people are trying to make a living, it also shows that basic aspect of Wong Kar-wai's work, which is how they're trying to, like, make connections. Occupant. That's a horror movie. It's on Tubi. And this guy stays in his great aunt's apartment and goes crazy. Very simple. It's kind of a New York movie, but kind of just this guy from outside of New York, not used to being so, like, holed in, and then, you know, he kills himself accidentally in the end. Lily, that's with two L's, Lilli. This woman gets kidnapped. It's an Indian movie, and then she slowly gets unkidnapped. It's pretty good. What? Do you need a fucking explanation for everything? Descent. That's a movie, you know, very atmospheric too. I was listening to Kokoroko Junction. You can just type that into YouTube. Kokoroko Junction the whole time. And it gave this ironic tropical feel to it, which I feel this is a very aquatic movie, even though it takes place in like a cave in Scotland. You know, there's a lot of water in caves. Checkmate, atheist. Hesher. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt invades the office Dwight's home, but then he also invades his heart. When watching this movie, I was listening to The Body, The Vision. You can just type that into YouTube. For the last like 30 minutes. It's very pulpy, you know, very big feeling, kind of dumb, but you know, still cool. Like AWE, is an Indian time travel movie. Time travel, multi-personality. It's just really convoluted. It's kind of stupid, but it's really interesting, I guess. And it justifies its logic overall. And there's multiple settings. There's this one retarded, like, looking magician guy who gets trapped in a bathroom. And at the end of the movie, you know, it's like hyperlink cinema. And there's this chef who's on his first day of the job talking to a fish. And this guy working on time machine, and this woman in a wheelchair says she's a future version of him. If you don't like that, you don't like that. Ravenous, I talked about that. It's the 1880s cannibal. Dans ma peu, I talked about it. It's the more artsy French Cannibal. Train to Busan. South Korean zombie movie. The train goes there. Good sense of action, claustrophobic. Pineapple Express. Whatever happened in this movie, it must have been good because it was a very fun movie with cool stuff happening, and the characters I liked because they were very relatable. Bittersweet Life, South Korean movie. This guy refuses to kill his boss's ex-girlfriend, and then he's kind of like revenged upon, like, oh, you fucking bitch. Then he revenges upon them in this huge killing scene, like kill, 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 kill. All within my hands, make it there, put you round and round in. Oh, my voice. But cool movie, good action. Quick, another Korean movie. This guy, his old girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, gets a helmet and it's gonna explode, and he has to like do the demands of this one guy. Cool action. He's on a bike. There's like he bikes from one building to the other. There's not many things where they bike from one building to the other. I don't know. I don't think so. The River. Obligatory Taiwanese movie. I know you're criticizing me for this, but, you know, The River, it's weird. Some guy jacks off his son, you know? If you're a fan of Come Town, you might like it. The Big Short, hyperlink, it's about the Wall Street crash. It has Michael Scott doing this, like, retarded, Steve Carell doing this retarded, like, New York accent. Other than that, it's well told about sort of boring financial stuff. It doesn't really get the full social impact, I think, of this, though it tells what happened correctly. So while I think it sort of is correct and its politics are good, it could be a lot more heavy-handed with the politics. I mean, I don't know how. Maybe some sort of montage of unrelated clips, because that doesn't feel foreign to hyperlink cinema necessarily. It's just that sort of more Family Guy cutaway thing. Maybe it's more suited to, I don't know, Edgar Wright stuff, but a lot of hyperlink, you can have something that's serious, but also have it be somewhat of a comedy. Like if you had this movie, The Big Short, be more like Wolf of Wall Street with asides about stuff. Like the characters in it aren't very wacky. The wackiest they get is that one Korean guy, like, I'm gonna do this shit and I'm gonna... And then Steve Carell is just like, I fucking hate you. I fucking hate you. Which is a fun scene. The Fistfoot Way. Is that what it's called? And that's where, Pineapple Express. Rudy Ray Moore? No, not Rudy Ray Moore. Rudy. Danny McBride is a kung fu instructor, and he does a bunch of juvenile shit. It's great. You know, I don't know about the rest of Danny McBride's stuff, but I want to know how they can make him Danny McBridal party me to Donald Trump. Joke. Another one, this is place 153 now. Observe and Report.
is a good Seth Rogen, sort of similar to Foot Fist Way. It's a sort of subversion of loner cinema, of just this like loser cinema, but like anti-loser cinema. And Foot Fist Way and Observe and Report are essentially just rip-offs of King of Comedy, but they have their own aspects to them. Like Observe and Report gets at this more functionally awkward guy, and the Foot Fist Way gets at this sort of American bravado, which is less like the sort of success-minded stuff that is in King of Comedy. Motherfucker. Yeah. This is so long. 2 hours. I'm almost done. The Wailing. What I like most about this Korean horror movie is the raining scenes, and all the stuff surrounding what's actually happening is much more interesting than what's actually happening, even though, it logically implicates in it. Quarantine. That's a movie with a bunch of deaf people, and Gael Garcia Bernal is in it. Wait, is it called Blindness? Is it called Blindness, or is it called Quarantine? I think it might be called Blindness. Yeah, so Blindness. It also has the Hulk, which, he's sort of a shit actor. The Hulk. Marvel movies suck, but this movie is good because it has a sort of like Walking Dead element to it, of just like, and a bit of a Children of Men, like a bit of a allegorical storytelling, but as much as it is allegorical, the allegory figures back into what's actually being told, because they gain back their sight at the end. They gain their sight before they even gain their sight back. Before Sunrise, whatever is in this film, I like. It's sort of on the level of Wong Kar-wai. It's a bit less interesting, but how they speak is still this interesting, semi-coded culture relation. And another thing to add to my list, Limits of Control, with the awesome Bjork soundtrack from the same director as Dead Man. Limits of Control is just this guy, he's a hitman, and there's also Paz de la Huerta, who is just nude throughout the whole movie, and this black guy who's like, I don't have sex on business, and he just kills stuff. It's a vibe movie. It's pretty cool. It's very easy to just put on in kind of the background and focus on throughout. It's one of those like wallpaper movies, like the soundtracks of any Carpenter film are a bit of a wallpaper. Go. That's a hyperlink cinema movie. It's one of those movies where they go to Vegas in one part of it, and there's this meme like tantric sex, tantric. This guy has sex for like 8 hours straight. It's pretty interesting, and it's a bit dipping in and out of different continuities. So the twists are interesting in that respect because they make you like wait for them. This one girl gets hit by the car,
but she ends up pretty much all right. Mr. Nobody. That's a great sort of, like, it has the features of both that Indian movie where, like, he had multiple personalities but also time travel, and Jacob's Ladder. But here, you know, he imagines 3 different timelines, one where he dates this Asian chick, one where he dates this blonde chick, and one where he dates his stepsister, depending on whether he goes with his mom or stays with his dad, and whether or not he goes to prom. It has that Black Mirror sort of sci-fi approach, which ends up, you know, working because, you know, it's just very colored in like a Nolan film, but instead of like the fancy filming techniques of a Nolan film, it's more like everything happens perfectly as you'd expect it to, which might end up being a bit like, oh, well, why did this happen or why did that happen? But then it's just like, or, oh, I don't like him in this or that. But overall, it's just this false or unreliable narrator thing where the movie begins with him being interviewed as the oldest human left alive. Leaves one to think about posthumanism and whether that really, you know, would lend us everything, because so much of life is just, you know, a sort of camel through a needle than for a rich man to get into. It's sort of like time. You go through time and then it's done, regardless of whether or not there's a time where you go through time and you die. There's always, you go through time and you've lost control of something, like you wake up and you've lost the dream. So who's to say there's a dream that we can get if we get the singularity? And I think that's sort of what this is about this attitude he has. Falling Down, Michael Douglas. Again, you don't have to be like, is the character good, is the character bad? You have to be like, oh, I like this character. That's what Falling Down is about. He's just this, like, determinator. He's so normal that he's violent. What a character. From Dusk Till Dawn. Vampires, Day and Night, Salma Hayek, Quentin Tarantino sucks her feet. Cool movie. They go into Mexico. Cool movie. The Incident. It's a Spanish movie. It's sort of like the Indian movie, but here there's like this loop in time, and what was the loop? Yeah, the loop in time is in 3 different places. One on a raft, one in this like vicinity of a gas station near mountains, cacti, and one in just this staircase with an elevator that won't open. And how they live in each of those for 30 years, these different people, and you have 2 in each scenario that survive, and then one of them will go into the next sort of loop, the one that is younger. And it's sort of a story about, oh, it gets sort of complicated, but more of the storytelling is interesting than the actual story. But the story isn't at all bad. It's just sort of a bit like the point of it is the anachronistic or non-linear storytelling like a Reservoir Dogs. But it's more to the point of the cool stuff that's happening than the story that's being told. Whereas Reservoir Dogs is really in the story and how the story in the past reveals a story in the present. So that it was important that you started in the present. Because just because you go around the bend, that does not mean it's not there. Baskin. It's a Turkish horror movie. These police are just like homophobic assholes. And then they end up in this cult thing. And it's just Silent Hill as fuck. The other movies by this director, like, I didn't like as much. Either of them, I don't think. But this one is just very creepy, very, like, serial killer shit. It's great. Roar. Any movie that the people in it are under threat of death is great. Magic, that's an Argentinian movie. You have Michael Cera, and he's just this asshole. And then some other girl, I forget who it was, I was watching all the movies of. And she ends up being schizophrenic. But then she dies in this case where she has like a seizure or something, asthma. And their only help is to just bring her to this sort of South American ritual healing, which I think ends up killing her. I think drowning her to death. Very funny. Very dark. Because it's just like, you're fucked. If you're around those sorts of people. And just like, then they bring you to those people with that sort of semi-confusion. It sort of says stuff about psychology, I guess. Is that all? I think that might be all of the list. I finally got through all, 153 movies? And it only took 2 hours and 17 minutes, which would mean that it took, about 1 minute per movie, or a bit less than 1 minute per movie. But yeah, that was a long video. That was a really my throat is fucking killing me. Yeah, I did it. I did it. I'm gonna go eat a sandwich now. Thank you for watching the video. If you've gotten to this point and are still watching and haven't clicked off, you should consider whatever you heard from this that was interesting. Try to link one to the other and sort of try to have the experience of one or the other.
And then you'll find that if you focus on certain words, then you'll have a better time. I think. So, with that, happy movies. And I will put a list in the description